America's military veterans wrote part of our country's history. Join us as we step into their story.
I grew up in I'd call the backwoods of Virginia, and not quite sure where it started, but I know it was at an early age. I like to describe it a lot of times. I always had a burning desire to be a soldier. That sense of service. My younger years, my formidable years were around veterans. I was always a history buff, but I always wanted to do my part. So I joined the military in my senior year of high school, knowing that as soon as I graduated that I was going straight into training, and I was happy at that point. I went to basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Basic training to almost anybody is going to be an experience that you'll never forget. You learn more about yourself, and then, of course, you learn a whole lot about others. And graduated there and transitioned into Fort Benning, Georgia for my infantry training. Everybody else went to their units, and I wound up to another 3 weeks of training to fire TOW missiles. And those were anti-tank missiles, and they were new on the market, so they were looking for people that they could sort of blend out into the forces and share some of that information. So I became a TOW missileman. That's when we were defending what they called the Fulda Gap in Europe. And we were always, it was more of the Cold War. There was always this fear that the Russians were going to invade, and we had this one area that we called the Fulda Gap, and it went through Fulda and all the way across Germany. And everybody had positions there. We already knew, that's our battle plans. We had positions on the Fulda Gap. And should the Russians make a provocative move, we all knew that we were what was well known as the speed bump to hold off the Russian horde just long enough for the United States to reinforce whatever we had lost during the initial invasion. So that was the primary mission in Europe itself, was deterrence. I competed for and was selected to go to the Master Gunner course. I went back to Fort Benning, Georgia for 3 months and became a Bradley Master Gunner. I could listen to a gun fire, and based on the noise that it made, I could tell you what was wrong with it. So if it didn't go boom, based on a tanker, a good tanker could do that too. You could hear the noise it makes when you pull the trigger, when you hear a slave switch go off or a positioning switch, and you know, and I was able to listen to that on the radio. I was immediately assigned as a battalion master gunner because I had all of the background experience, the connections and the relationships with any and all of the training that was going on in the world of Bradley fighting vehicles. So I spent probably a year or so there, always competing and trying to move into that and asking for, let me have a platoon. I need to be a platoon sergeant. That's what I came here to do. I've been a team leader, I've been a squad leader, I've been a trainer, I've been a drill sergeant. I want to be that platoon sergeant. And I was, at that point, I was a sergeant first class, and lo and behold, granted a platoon. And so I was in Charlie Company. We were 3rd Platoon. I had 4 Bradley fighting vehicles. Wannabe great soldiers with serious challenges. We were in the middle of Aschaffenburg, Germany. They drank like crazy. They partied like hell. They fought like hell. They came together like hell. The camaraderie was solid. And so we became one big family. Then Desert Storm was getting ready to kick off. And there was always the rumblings of, what's going to happen? What's happening? Is this real? Is this not real? A lot of discussions were, well, I came in the Army to fight, now I get a chance to fight. Most of your older soldiers understood that there's an inherent danger in being a soldier, but there's more of an inherent danger of going to combat. Nobody cherishes doing that, but nobody ever stepped back and said, no, that's not what I came here for. I've trained all my life. Now it's time to it's the Super Bowl of your livelihood. It was something you trained to do. Now I want to go give given an opportunity, want to find out if I meet the muster, if I'm able to perform as well as I've been trained. And the whole brigade had been deployed. And when I finally understood that, I was like, oh my gosh. And we were part of the 1st Armored Division. So we were task force organized into a whole armored division, but that was part of 7th Corps. The amount of equipment, people, materials, just to support that. And then to understand that we're part of 42 other nations. And it was the northern portion, of course, of Saudi Arabia, the southern border of Iraq. And that's where the Iraqis had, over the years, had built a berm and a big tank ditch that separated the two countries. And I'm sure that during a period of time leading up to our arrival that they had fortified and reinforced all of that. Tomorrow morning, we're breaching the berm, guys, and we're going at it. And I can remember the company commander telling us, just remember, there's nothing friendly in front of you. They don't want you here, but damn it, we're going. And it was late that night when things changed drastically. We were prepared for tomorrow morning, but in our eyes, tomorrow morning never came. About midnight that night, it's when the crackling on the radio. We go now. The engineers had breached several breaches in the berm. Tanks rolled through. Our Bradleys rolled through. The Apache helicopters were flying over. And we were watching this in real time. Not to use the term all hell breaks loose, but it's in the middle of the night. And so flashes of bright light, which we know are reports of weapons going off, things happening. You've got your Apaches that are firing rockets, tanks are firing. God knows it could have been in the middle of the damn night and just into nothingness. But then you start to see explosions. That lasted maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds was about all of it. It was really very, very light resistance. I managed to throw a track. The first time I'd ever thrown a track off of a tracked vehicle that I can remember in probably the previous 10 years. The Iraqi army had fled. We were on a 300-mile, come to find out later on we learned, we were on a 300-mile trek across the desert. And there were times there were sporadic firefights here and there, but they were not much to speak of. At that point, soldiers didn't care. I looked over to my wingman, and we were in the middle of a firefight, firing at BMPs and tanks, and you're not going to believe this, but it's the truth. His vehicle was firing, he was shaving. He had a Bic razor in his hand, and he was shaving and watching what was going on. And he had a CVC on, the helmet, with a boom mic, talking to his driver, talking to his gunner at the same time. But he decided that was the time he was going to shave. So it gave me a lot of comfort knowing that these guys thought that this was no big deal. This was just like a Friday night football game, and they're going to do this over and over and over again. But he was shaving. We spent the final part of Desert Storm. The war was already over. Now, that following morning is when we got the call that the war was over. Of course, everybody was excited. We're all happy. Okay, no one deflated. We were all excited. We had accomplished what we thought in 100 hours what we had anticipated. We never anticipated a World War II type scenario. We anticipated a period of time that came nowhere near 100 hours. And we spent the rest of that month sort of a mopping up mission, moving across the desert until we moved up on Highway 1 from Basra to Baghdad, and you had sporadic units of the Iraqis that were trying to escape from the northern portion of what was left of Kuwait and move across. We had wound up. We ended up in one location, and that was just short of the burning oil fields. And I had pictures of it, of a sign that I was holding that said it's 1:30 in the afternoon, and it was looked like it was midnight, because the oil fields were burning and all you could see was small torches on the horizon, but the entire sky was blacked out and it was like midnight. You couldn't see a thing. You had to use a flashlight to walk around. And it was like that for about 3 days. It was total blackness for about 3 days. We moved up onto Highway 1 and did what we called the interdiction mission, which was the collection, prevent the Iraqis from escaping back towards Baghdad. And we did that, yeah, I'd say heroically. It was, a thankless mission because we spent most of the time trying to rescue civilians that were trying to escape at the same time. And they sent me back here for my last year, and I was the commandant of the Non-Commissioned Officers Academy, and proudly retired after 35 years as the commandant, the only enlisted person on Fort Hood, Texas, who held a command position.